Performance might not land them on the list of the biggest reasons to love New York. But let's find out what the other reasons are, as highlighted by the new edition of New York Magazine. It's the 18th annual Reasons to Love New York issue with the overarching theme of the city's comeback following the devastating COVID pandemic. Joining us now, editor-in-chief of New York Magazine, David Haskell. Very good to have you back on the show. We haven't seen each other since before COVID, so I guess that makes sense. What do we got? And also, what does New York still need to work on? What's topping the list, though, of reasons to love New York?
Well, so even though in many ways we're a national magazine, once a year we decide in December to put this issue out. It's a special issue. It's the 18th edition.
Right.
Somewhat of a love letter to the city or a holiday card, and a way to look back on how the city has fared throughout the year. 2 years ago, we did it somewhat differently. We called it Reasons We've Loved New York, and it was a very somber wake, basically, for 500. We tracked down 500 businesses, restaurants, bars, stores, gyms that had closed throughout the pandemic, and gave little tributes to them. We were making the issue in our own little bedrooms and closets and figuring out our way through a completely remote close. And it just seemed to us this year a mark of how far we are in our experience in this pandemic, that the overwhelming feeling was of busyness, jostling, bustling city. And so starting with the cover, it's sometimes difficult to wrangle a celebrity to be on the cover. What we decided to do here was to invite 72 notable New Yorkers to join us on the cover.
Wow.
And the concept was really that feeling that feels to us specific to New York, where you're walking down the street with a friend and crossing an intersection, and it's like, hey, what isn't that? And maybe it's you, or maybe it's Z-Way, or maybe it's Chuck Schumer. And so we invited many people to an intersection in the Meatpacking District and worked with a phenomenal photographer, Pel Cass, who was stationed above on the High Line. And he spent the day, there were just black cars rolling in and bringing in one New Yorker after another, and spent the day photographing them bouncing from one part of the intersection to the other. And Jody Quan, our director of photography, and her whole team were standing there traffic policing. And the way this photographer works, he just layers images on top of others on top of others. So this was shot 7 days ago, and it took about 7 days of post-production work to make sure that we're placing Paul Rudd in the right spot, and Alex Katz in the right spot, and Spike Lee in the right spot, and all that stuff. And
there's an interesting tone to the way you've approached this. I'm just looking at some of New York Magazine's top reasons to love New York for discussion, and you have, because we've started treating the subway like our living room again. And then it goes, because no matter where you live, New Yorkers can help you get an abortion and pay for it, too.
Yeah, I mean, it's always important to us when we're doing an issue like this to look at politics and social issues and the role that the city plays in the national context. And we are often writing stories that are fairly urgent stories about immigration and social issues, gay issues, abortion issues sometimes. And so the two that were most, I think, moving to us this year were that story of how meaningful the city has been in a national context for people looking to get an abortion that couldn't get elsewhere, and the amount of sort of grassroots, just local support to help make that happen. And then also there's a very touching story about a woman who has been working with bust-in migrants, showing up at the Port Authority and having no idea where to go, and she's been basically adopting them into her home, it was just really, to us, an interesting slice of life, not just at the policy level, but just as a kind, decent New Yorker, helping them get a leg up on a new city.
So this is the 18th edition of this list. In any previous year, had you said this, you would have been deemed insane.
Yeah.
Even LaGuardia is kind of ritzy. So talk to us about the evolution of the airport all New Yorkers have loved to hate.
Well, have you been to LaGuardia?
It's nicer now.
I just landed there.
Interesting.
I know.
We were sitting there staring at the word ritzy. I guess we landed on ritzy.
Ritzy,
but, classy, glamorous felt a little bit too much, but
big, serviceable, might be. It was an upgrade from
big,
where it was.
But less big than JFK, so it's actually kind of, you can move around it pretty well.
But if you're used to the old LaGuardia, it's
bigger.
And the other thing we did in just a couple hundred words talking about it, it was important to us to point out just the engineering marvel. They didn't shut it down when they built on top of it a new one.
That is a marvel.
And you could see as you were driving by over the last couple of years, just it was sort of like, working in ground zero, but keeping the one train running. Like it's pretty incredible how the city manages public works projects.
All right, John Hellman.
So when this started, I think it was 2005, right? Was the first one of these?
That sounds right.
I think I was at the magazine then, and part of the reason why it started was this, in some ways, this is a magazine feature that could be like a big service feature. It's just a list of things, and a love letter to the city.
Sure.
But the other thing that was happening then, and this leads to my question about what's happening now, is it was very much, I thought, when it was first, when Adam Moss and the team, then some people like Jody Kwan, who were around even then, thought this up. It was that New York had just come through 9/11, and the notion of there was a larger story behind Reasons to Love, which was like people the city seemed to have teetered to 9/11, and then there was this burst of energy, and some of it was the return of finance, some of it was the birth of the Strokes in the Lower East Side rock scene, the Meet Me in the Bathroom era, all that sort of stuff. The city's comeback was kind of encapsulated in that. So I guess I wonder, as you think about this as the editor of a thing like this, beyond these are here's some really clever, interesting things to point out about what's going on in the city, is there a bigger story here of what is happening to New York in the post-pandemic era, another era where people thought, hey man, New York could be dead? What do you see? How does this all add up to, and the big theme of it all, if there is one?
Well, I think the theme is it starts right there, and it says that the city is just so far from dead. It is alive. What does that mean, though? It really does not look like Mike Bloomberg City. And I think we might find, in a historical way, de Blasio City was sort of a transition. But what we live in right now is a little bit dirtier, a little bit more confusing. You have a sort of, high energy, rambunctious, hard to keep track of where his head's at mayor, a lot of sort of tawdry tabloid scandals. You've got, it feels to me in a lot of ways like a New York City that I grew up in, not the one that I spent my career editing in. But to me, what I think is valuable about taking stock in a year like this and just saying, look around, it's just absurd to imagine that the city had somehow failed to survive the pandemic years. It will evolve. And just as, there are conversations about we will never build skyscrapers again after 9/11. Yeah. And it felt a little bit of that when we were talking about Midtown. And, of course, there are some office jobs that have turned remote or to hybrid, but you walk around the blocks that we're at right now, and it's just clear to me that this is a place that many people want to be, and that plays out in really kind of weird and often high friction ways, and that's a lot of what New York's about.
New York Magazine's 18th annual Reasons to Love New York issue is out now. Editor-in-Chief David Haskell, thank you very much for coming in. Good to see you again. Haven't seen you since pre-COVID, I guess.